appropriate public voice to speak out about gun violence. And that just bothered me. I have not had any personal experience from a loved one being killed or none of that. It just bothered me so much. And I think I was born with a pacifist gene, not a passive nature. As I continue to feel both anger and kind of deep sadness about death from guns. I finally came up with the following poster that I felt good about displaying. I'm going to pass this around. I showed it to Matt Gwynn, who is one of our staff people at Honors Peace, and said, may I display this at the OEP booth at annual conference? He said, yes, you may, and you may sign up people to start a campaign within the Church of the Brethren for gun violence prevention. So I felt like I could finally do something, and I did have some people just stop and look at that poster. Interesting, they said. So I had some good conversations. So when we signed up a lot of people and got started about a year ago, then there was an emphasis at the Church of the Brethren annual conference. How many people here are members of Church of the Brethren? I guess I'm speaking to everybody then. So I just show a few slides from annual conference last year and some of the things that we did. I think, where's my, there we go. This is a poster that you can read. We can end gun violence. It was at the end of a display of empty chairs of representing people that had been killed by gun violence, both adults and children. Then there was a witness and a vigil that was planned, and we had over 100 people. It was just added to the program at the last minute. There were other things, so many other things going on. We had a really good turnout, and people appreciated it a lot. Good music, good speaking, good witness. Even the vice mayor came to speak, and she was strongly in favor, and she had even looked up what the Church of the Brethren had done in the past and applauded the fact that we had a statement. At the table, I kind of supervised this. There was a little quilt made by a lot of children and adults who made their picture about how they felt about gun violence. This quilt was given to Rhonda Pittman, who is the annual conference director for the Church of the Brethren. Then we were really pleased about this. Over 350 people signed this pledge, and I'm going to show you what it says. As a disciple of Jesus, the Prince of Peace, I pledge, left off I there, to be an agent of change to end gun violence. So all ages signed this pledge. Okay, so when I got home from annual conference, I determined that we need to do something locally. We should get involved as many people as we can. And I put out the option for a number of people that I knew to come to a book study. The book study of this book that I'm also going to pass around, called Common Ground, was written by Donald Gaffney, who is a pastor and a Sandy Hook alum. There were 8 chapters. So we took, 6 chapters, 6, and we took a chapter a week and talked about this. And now I want to introduce people who were in that book study, who were both Ruth, that I already introduced, Liz Long, and and Luther Eberly, and Marilyn Groves, and Nan Herbal. So, and this might be new to you, Nan. Last week we did the last chapter, and we finished by reading the Sandy Hook Promise at the very end. And most of the people said we want to continue meeting to see what we might be able to learn and what we might be able to do more locally. One of the strong pieces of advice that the author gave us was to not advocate in ignorance. So there is so much to learn. And so I'm going to move into bringing some of that knowledge to you through videos. And I know sometimes these videos go very fast. And so I'm wondering if you might raise your hand if you want to pause, or maybe I will pause to ask if you caught this information. Does that work for you? Okay. Oops. Oh, come on. Not doing it. Oh, there.
The United States has a problem with gun violence.
We hold the victims in our hearts. Perhaps we may never fully understand it.
We talk about it after mass shootings, but it's much larger and more complicated than those debates allow. Here's what you need to know about the state of gun violence in America. It's true that the U.S. sees many more mass shootings than these other developed countries. Between 2000 and 2014, there were 133 mass shootings in public populated places.
Okay.
The United States has a problem with gun violence.
We hold the victims in our hearts. Perhaps we may never fully understand it.
No.
We talk about it after mass shootings, but it's much larger and more complicated than those debates allow.
I don't know anything about making this show up.
Here's what you need to know about the state of gun violence in America. It's true that the U.S. sees many more mass shootings than these other developed countries. Between 2000 and 2014, there were 133 mass shootings in public populated places. That's excluding gang violence.
What can we do?
Of course, the U.S. is a much larger country, but if you adjust for population size, it still ranks higher. Of these countries, Finland is next, with just 2 shootings over 14 years.
I can get it to show on my computer, but it's
and this
not
type of tragedy seems to be happening more often in the U.S. Each of these squares represents a public mass shooting with 4 or more fatalities. Before 2011, they happened 6 months apart on average. But since then, only 2 months go by between them.
I hope and pray that I don't have to come out again.
Sorry. Well, I did it from home, and I mean, it comes up on my computer, but I can't get it up there.
The United States has a problem with
Not
gun
showing.
violence.
We hold the victims in our hearts. Perhaps we may never fully understand it.
We talk about it after mass shootings, but it's much larger and more complicated than those debates allow. Here's what you need to know about the state of.
I'm gonna try this other one. Sorry. Do you want to just listen? Let's see if this one does the same thing.
Oh, yeah, it's doing the same thing.
Yeah. Okay. Well, shall we just use our ears? I'm sorry. It was so much better if you can see. Here's another idea. I'm going to try one more thing. Come here, baby. Huh. That didn't even go down. Okay. Let's just see something.
Is there a way to close the program that's on the screen?
Yeah, that's what I need to do.
There, I've changed that.
Oh, okay.
Oops, now I broke it back.
Oh. I didn't get the right one.
The United States has a problem with gun violence.
We hold the victims in our hearts, perhaps we may never fully understand them.
We talk about it after mass shootings, but it's
There you
much
go. Yes,
larger
that's okay.
and more complicated than those debates allow. Here's what you need to know about the state of gun violence in America. It's true that the US sees many more mass shootings than these other developed countries. Between 2000 and 2014, there were 133 mass shootings in public
Lower
populated
the
places, as excluding gang violence and terrorism. Of course, the US is a much larger country, but if you adjust for population size, it still ranks higher. Of these countries, Finland is next, with just 2 shootings over 14 years, but a much, much smaller population. And this type of tragedy seems to be happening more often in the US. Each of these squares represents a public mass shooting with 4 or more fatalities. Before 2011, they happened 6 months apart on average. But since then, only 2 months go by between them.
I hope and pray that I don't have to come out again during my tenure as president. It's often my condolences to families of these soldiers.
That was October 1st, 2015. And just about 2 months later,
Yesterday, our first order of business is to send our thoughts and prayers to the families of those who were killed.
public mass shootings get all the attention because they're often so indiscriminate. But the truth is, mass shootings are unlike most gun deaths in America. Here's how it breaks down. According to the most recent data, 92 people are killed with guns every day on average. About 30 of those are homicides, of which maybe 1.5 at most can be considered part of mass shootings. Most of those killed, 58 people a day, are suicides. The rest are accidental shootings, police actions, and undetermined incidents. Those suicides, they show up in international comparisons too. These are the 10 countries ranked highest on human development by the UN. The US has the highest suicide rate among them, and this darker bar shows how many of those are with guns. Some people think suicide isn't really relevant to the gun issue.
But does no one think that some type of gun control regulations that are being talked about are going to stop somebody from committing suicide? And there's so many other ways for people to commit suicide.
But the methods that people use are important because suicide attempts often stem from temporary crises. The vast majority of people who survive suicide attempts don't end up dying from suicide, but guns make it nearly impossible to get that second chance. The victims of gun suicides are overwhelmingly men and mostly white. And the rate of gun suicides has been increasing in the US. At the same time, the rate of gun homicides has been decreasing. especially since the 90s when crime rates in general were higher. But if you compare the US to other developed countries, it doesn't look like good news. These are homicides adjusted for population size. The US would probably have a higher homicide rate even without guns, but you can see how gun violence pushes that rate far beyond the other countries here. The victims of these shootings, they're not the ones you often see on the national news. They're disproportionately young Black men.
You guys really need to go on with your lives. We gotta go on to empty rooms. Because our children's lives were taken away by people who should not have had guns anyway.
One possible explanation is that the US simply has more crime than those other countries. But if you set aside homicides for a moment and look at rates of burglary or assault, you don't see that same spike that you see with homicide. It's not that America has much more crime. It's that crime in the US is much more lethal. Altogether, the number of gun deaths in the US from 2000 to 2013 exceeds the number of Americans killed by AIDS, by illegal drug overdoses, the Iraq and Afghanistan wars, and terrorism combined. It should be clear by now that this level of gun violence is a uniquely American problem among the developed world. And here's one reason why. There are a ton of guns in the US. This chart shows the estimated number of guns by country. It's adjusted for population size, and it's still not even close.
The question I would like to ask is how on earth could he compile 13 guns? How can that happen?
If you take a look back at the 10 countries with the highest levels of human development, you can see that it's relatively really easy to get a gun in the US. All of the other countries require a license to purchase most guns, and those purchases are recorded into an official registry. To get that license, people have to state a reason for why they want a gun. And in most of these countries, they have to pass a safety test and are required by law to store their guns safely. In part because of its lax laws, there are well over 300 million guns in the US, and counting. This chart doesn't reflect private sales, but it shows the number of background checks, which all federally licensed dealers have to run. It suggests that the demand for guns has been increasing steeply since Barack Obama took office. So we've looked at gun deaths and gun ownership. This chart puts them together. It shows that among highly developed countries, the more guns in a country, the more gun deaths. You can see that countries like Switzerland, which have relatively more guns than a country like the Netherlands, also have a higher gun death rate. And here's the US. Likewise, US states with more guns have more gun homicides. There are outliers like Idaho, which has higher rates of gun ownership but low rates of gun murders. But overall, there's a correlation between gun ownership and homicide rates. And that relationship has held up in studies that control for things like poverty, unemployment, and crime. The correlation between gun ownership and gun deaths is even stronger for suicides. It makes sense. Depression with a gun is more dangerous than depression without one. Likewise, fights, domestic disputes, road rage, drunkenness, all much more dangerous with a gun than without. That said, you might need different policies to keep guns away from potential mass shooters than you would to keep them out of inner city gangs or out of the hands of someone who might hurt themselves. America doesn't have a gun problem. It has several of them.
Okay. Before we go on with my PowerPoint, I'd like to just ask what struck you as new information in what you just saw? The suicide rate. Number of guns in the United States.
I think I did this before, but has there been any studies done on why guns spiked after bombs were run?
Why guns spiked after? Okay. Do any of you have an idea why the gun spiked? Dean, what would you say? Sc- Oh, black president.
Blacks are scary, and we have a black person.
That's one idea. Right wing. What about right wing?
They were afraid they were gonna take the guns away because of the Democrat.
Afraid they were going to take the guns away. I want to offer an idea that has to do with money. Does anyone know how much money the NRA has? $9 billion. What do they do with that money? Lobby. What? What else? Ads. Directly support candidates. And our candidates are always looking for money. So they are beholden to the NRA. So how do we get anything changed? Anything else? The suicide you mentioned, 60% of gun deaths are attributed to suicide. What they did not bring up in this video is that death by guns is now the largest, the strongest, the most prominent way children ages 18 and under die. And why we allow that in our country is just beyond me. Okay. Anything else you wanted to bring up from what you saw? I want to thank Ruth for bringing this video to me, and I thought it would be helpful information today.
Our state itself has gotten more liberal about carrying guns around, no license, no, wherever you want to put them or take them is okay. And it's our state, and we don't have a real say in it.
Thank you for being knowledgeable about that. That was my very next slide. And add to it, if I don't have something in it that you think is important. Indiana laws include no license to own a gun, no permit required to carry a firearm. Both concealed carry and open carry are allowed. 18 years and older can own a gun. One good thing, private property owner controls who can carry firearms on their property.
If it's concealed, that's very hard to do.
Concealed, she says it's hard to do if it's concealed. And our Manchester Church of the Brethren has little signs on our doors, but there's nothing posted that says no guns allowed on this property anywhere. And we've had a gun be carried into our church. So I think keeping our heads in the sand about this and not doing anything, I think we just probably would be better off being proactive. Okay, and on everybody's behalf, I'm going with a gentleman who was also in our class to talk to the county clerk about how they, this afternoon, how they choose locations for voting. Because with these new liberal Indiana laws, it likely could be that we are, maybe not y'all, but we're needing to vote in places where guns are allowed within, on the premise, which it's not a good plan in my mind. They are not allowed in most government buildings. They are also not allowed in airports, out of whatever. Where else are they not allowed? For a while, schools, not allowed in schools and within 1,000 feet parameter of schools. Unless they're police, exactly, yeah. Unless they are a security officer, yeah. Courthouses, yes, government buildings. Prisons, you mean the prisoners? The guards probably, right, to visit. Yeah. But we have, I think this video told us that the main difference we have with other countries is just the number of guns have just exploded. And the more guns, the more death by guns. A culture in our country that other first world countries don't have. Could you say a little bit more about that, Roger?
Well, I think from the very beginning, our country depended a lot on weapons, and that has not lessened. And just how we would fight for all these kinds of rights, that's a whole culture. It isn't just in a few politicians. They would not be able to do that if it wasn't our whole country having that kind of a backing.
So he's saying it's in our history from the time that our formation. There's another very interesting video that's long. It starts at the beginning. And what I learned from that is that there were a number of regulations put into place having to do with guns in the 1800s. So it's not a new thing, and it's not unconstitutional to regulate. Okay, thank you. Yes.
There's one more thing I would add up there that is, I'm sorry. There's another Indiana law that is good besides that bottom one, and that is if a family or a community or the police see someone acting chaotically, shooting off guns, not using common sense, you can appeal to the court and the police will take the guns away. That's the only law that I think is really good in India.
Is that the red flag law? Okay, thank you for mentioning that. I am very dubious about stand your ground laws. I think those are awful because they all depend upon what this person believes. And so if somebody comes to the door and knocks on the door and this person believes he's an intruder for whatever reason, bam. Okay, thank you. I really appreciate your feedback. And I think Ruth has been around for you to sign up if you want to receive emails, newsletter emails that will come out either once every 2 months or 3 months that are generated by the Church of the Brethren Gun Violence Prevention Action Team. That's at the denominational level. It's what was formed by Honor Peace that I described at the beginning. And we will be active again at annual conference coming this up in Grand Rapids in Michigan. There is a group that meets up every quarter. You can join that group. We had about 30 people join, and you can get this information via the newsletter that comes out. So if you're interested in being with other folks who are passionate about trying to do something, this might be a good connection. And all of you are welcome, any of you are welcome to join our local group. We're meeting on Thursdays at 5 o'clock. This next Thursday, it will be at the Manchester Church of the Brethren at 5 o'clock this week. We might change locations after that. We're going to talk about that. Any other questions before we close? Yeah, that's what I was going to close with. Thank you. Every town for gun safety has created a survivors network to support people who have experienced gun violence. And this is the 6th year that they have established a week to honor the victims of gun violence. And there are a number of stories there are 250 stories that have been collected that people have written. I took the liberty to print off some of those stories that you can feel free to take one and hold that particular survivor or the story that they told in prayer support for their healing and for their action. So those are available for you to take. You don't have to leave them on the table. You could take one with you and feel that connection and that support. I'm going to read 3 of them that I have up here right now. Do it this way. It has been mentioned that telling the stories is so important. That's one of the reasons I wanted to spend this time this way. In memory of Monique Kistner. My mother, Monique Kistner, was taken by gun violence in a homicide that occurred on January 5th, 2022. The night I learned the news that my mother's life was taken changed me forever. My mom was the most kind-hearted, altruistic woman to exist. She loved and cared about every person and every living thing that she met. My mom was always helping others, having dinner with people she could tell were lonely or caring for hurt animals. She furnished the home of a woman bringing herself and her child out of homelessness, volunteered with the homeless in the community, and enjoyed spending time with people she met on the street. She did not boast about any of the work she did in her community. One friend described my mom as her living saint. It is without a doubt that gun violence took away my mom, my best friend and role model, too soon. She had a beautiful, special heart and spirit that I will hope to continue as her legacy. My brother, Louis Arthur Pacheco, the youngest of our 6 siblings and a pretty happy-go-lucky guy, was 27 years old when he died from a self-inflicted gunshot to the head. It changed my life forever, and truthfully, the lives of everybody in our nuclear family, as well as our extended family and friends. The stigma of suicide is very strong in Latino culture. At first, my father and 2 brothers did not want to talk. My sisters and I were the only ones who tried to make sense of something that will never, ever make sense. A high school teacher at the time, I felt the stigma even with my well-meaning administration and fellow faculty, who told me that I didn't have to talk about it. I worked with juniors and seniors, and when I did tell them about Louis, they were not only empathic, but they then started coming out of the woodwork after school and before school. It was overwhelming, hearing from 20, 25 kids saying things like, I never wanted to talk about this, but I've thought about taking my own life. We found ourselves having informal therapy type groups. At the end of the school year, I took a leave of absence to take care of my father, who was having an extremely difficult time after a series of tragic losses, including my mother and Louis. That's when I decided to go back to school for a degree in educational psychology and counseling. I wanted to finish so badly that I did my 7-year program in 3.5. Today, my private practice specializes in young children and adolescents, suicide and gun violence survivors, and veterans suffering from PTSD. This is the last one I will read. As a member of this community, I have witnessed the devastating impact of gun violence. I have lost friends and neighbors to senseless acts fueled by easy access to firearms. The trauma and loss that results from these incidences rips through the community, leaving us with heartbreak and pain. Our right to live without fear of gun violence is as important, if not more so, than the right to own a firearm. In the face of the epidemic of gun violence, it's time for commitment to finding real solutions. I call on our leaders to act and address this issue. Together, we can create a safer and more peaceful community for future generations. The Love Revolution, a movement promoting love and understanding, is a positive step towards healing and creating a brighter future. Let us spread love and positivity in the face of violence and hatred. I believe that, quote, together we stand, divided we'll fall. With love, we will conquer all. And I want to add that love that is proactive. Prayer is also very important. Thank you for your attention.